So I wanted to kind of dive in and talk about these five essential things that we can think about in our leadership and why it's so important and crucial that we have intentionality with our leadership. And so, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jessica Rice. I am the CEO and founder of Jessica Rice Coaching. I work with a lot of ambitious leaders who are really looking to either up level within their leadership, up level with how they lead their teams, create systemic change, create a real impact within their organizations, or really how they start to up level within their roles in other ways and create greater fulfillment, meaning, and alignment within their careers and developing their own brand of thought leadership. I work with a ton of leaders who are in the tech industry right now, and they're really facing a lot of challenges because it has been an interesting year in terms of reduced workforce, greater need, greater prioritization of tasks, and really trying to understand how do we navigate operating within this space and still have the efficiency and being intentional with how we lead our teams. And so I want to talk about these top five things that we can start to think about and how we can go from maybe, feeling like you're fighting fires constantly at the end of a rope, whiplash constantly happening where you're struggling to see the forest through the trees because each and every day is just filled with more and more and more. And it's hard to be intentional in that space. And so these top five things, I'll just give a real highlight is, really understanding our clarity of vision, creating purpose-driven goals, empowering our teams, developing consistent communication patterns, and really truly leading by example. Now, these probably don't sound very novel, and they shouldn't, because as leaders, they should be something that we've already thought about. But I want to dive in a little bit more and see if this can provide some insight for you, or maybe just a shift in thinking. Because anytime that we are kind of under the gun, maybe we have, tunnel vision, we don't always see the full picture. And so we can easily lose sight, even on things that we've already mastered, things that we've already thought that we've done. So clarity of vision, I would really ask, do you fully understand? Does your team fully understand the vision for the company? Now, I've worked with leaders who that, yes, I understand our vision, I understand our core values, but do you really? Does the team understand, what their unique vision is in relation to, their context within the company, how they can show up and be a part of this vision? Because vision is really understanding the company's direction. It's the driver behind, achieving the company's purpose and why the company even exists. And sometimes we don't even think about why does the company exist and really deeply, you know, go through that thought examination. Like, what is it here for? It's a very existential exercise. So as Peter Hawkins describes, a mission captures the company's ambition. A vision shows what it will be like when success is achieved. But purpose defines who the company serves and the value that it creates for them. So many teams, don't fully understand their vision, let alone their purpose. And so when you go from those day-to-day tasks, you're putting out fires, you're trying to understand what it is that we're doing. When we have some clarity around how all of our efforts lead back to the overall company's vision, now we can start to create some greater clarity into the efforts that we're doing every single day, who the team is in service to, and really what should be prioritized. If we're stepping back and we're thinking strategically, even if we're not in the decision-making seat, we can now become better and better leaders, more informed, and maybe even asking the right questions. And so this is really the first impact, of leading with intent. So what can you do? How do you understand the vision? Understand first, where are the gaps? Ask your team, where are the gaps for you? Where are the gaps in the efforts that you're doing on a daily basis and how they lead back or how they tie back with the corporate vision, and see if they have a pretty good understanding. I've worked with numerous teams who sometimes they were doing efforts, but they really couldn't tie back and see how that effort was actually moving the company forward. And if we want to motivate our teams, it's important that they understand why, not only what they're doing, but why they're doing it. Why is it important so that they can get behind it? That's how we start to develop intrinsic motivation so that they can feel like they're a part of it. They're a part of something and they can see how it contributes to the larger picture. Also ask your team to define, who are the key stakeholders? How are they in service to them? Do they even understand who the key stakeholders are in every scenario? Sometimes we just think like, oh, here's the project manager and I've been given this new project, or, program manager, product manager, however, your company is structured. So they just start looking at, here's the task that's in front of me. This is all I need to do. But we're not giving them leadership prowess if we're not allowing for them to really understand where their efforts are going to. And if they're able to go through the exercise and really understand who are the different business owners, who are the clients, who are the colleagues, who are the consumers of this code or this product or this service, who are the business owners, like how does the work that we're doing impact all of these different areas and functional roles and responsibilities, so that they can fully see like, okay, my efforts matter and the decisions that I make matter. And how can I how can I make improvements? How can I reach out? How can I be in service in a greater way? And by doing so, now you can start to maybe think about how you define your own team's mission, vision, and purpose, as it relates to their key functional areas within the organization. Because now you're creating this kind of ecosystem for your team so that they have clarity around what they show up for every single day. So that leads us to then key number 2, which is really developing purpose-driven goals. And, I know that sometimes we feel like we're just on the receiving end of a long list of priorities and projects and things that we're supposed to do, let alone all of the fires that happen. But not every task is a priority. Not every ask is a priority. It may be important, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to jump on it, or that's the first thing that we should jump on just because it was received. And I know a lot of leaders who are going through whiplash right now because they feel like, okay, something crossed their desk, something crossed their email, through their Slack, and they feel that they have to jump on this and they have to jump on this. And then that starts to permeate down into the team. So they're constantly in this mode of firefighting, picking up the next task, and just feeling scattered. If we can dial that back and we really go back, okay, what's that vision? What's that purpose? What are we moving towards? Now we can start to create some clarity, and we can create boundaries around, okay, what is it that's really going to move the needle forward? What's the essence of what it is that we're supposed to be doing? So creating, clarity around your priorities and goals so that you can greater discern which task is going to move the needle forward for the company, for whatever it is that is priority number 1. It may seem like we always have to respond, and it might be the fire that is important, but at least you can step back, you can pause, and you can think through it in ways where you're not just reacting. We're in such this reactionary mode where, we're just responding, but we're not thinking. So not everything can be a priority. And if you've read Greg McKeown's book, which I've been reading lately on essentialism, he talks about this in greater depth, which is, really there's only one priority. And we've really coined this phrase of priorities in, the last century, where now we have multiple priorities, but We can only focus on one task at a given time. And in Stanford study, it's the more that we try to multitask, the more our memory is impacted, the more our productivity is impacted. So we're not really multitasking, we're just task switching. And we're just trying to do it at a rapid space, or a rapid pace, I should say. And it's not really serving us. It's not really helping us in the way that we think. And I actually wrote a whole email about that I sent out this morning to my newsletter. So really thinking about, every time that something comes down, how can you be intentional? So create for your team some regular discussions around goal setting and how those relate to top priorities that your team is in charge of. Also, be the buffer for your team. Be the one who's willing to ask those tough questions and allow your team to be spared. Allow them to be able to set, some space in their brain so that they can focus on the things that they need to. And then when it truly is an emergency, then you can, enlist them for greater support. But pause and reflect and inquire as to the importance of the different requests that come across your way and determine if it's truly necessary. And make sure that you can set realistic expectations of your team, for your team, with business. We can't say yes to everything. Squeezing in one more item is not a solid plan for achieving, real results. Something is always going to get pushed to the bottom. And I was having a conversation yesterday with a leader, and we were talking about that. We're like, we can't say yes. When you're saying yes to everything, you're actually saying no to other things, just inadvertently, right? Things are just, you're having to say no because you're saying yes. There is no real such thing as just squeezing another thing in. It's about being deliberate with your priorities. So key number 3 then is how we empower our team. Now, I've spoken on psychological safety in the past. It's critical that you establish and create an environment of psychological safety within your team in order for you to empower your team. And if you can't create it at the organizational level, you can do that within the homeostasis of your team. Create internal psychological safety and trust within the ecosystem of your team, even if externally you can't fully control the environment of the organization. Because when teams feel empowered, they will then take ownership and they will take initiative. So many leaders struggle with delegation. They struggle with knowing how to empower their teams or motivate their teams because they struggle themselves with either trusting their team or really understanding what motivates their team. When we can move into looking at our leadership not as a leader, but as a supporter, and being a supportive role for the team. Because truly, if you are leading in a service, from a service-based perspective, you're in service to your team. You're helping them to drive efficiency. You're helping them to be successful. That's what your role is. And so you can start to shift the dynamics of the team from feeling like workers to feeling like contributors. Some team members might even struggle with seeing themselves in this capacity. Maybe they're worried about saying the wrong thing or stepping on toes or, making a mistake. And that's where you as a leader can come in and create a safe space to empower them in their own, thought leadership, innovation, creativity, where they feel free to challenge ideas, all in the name of furthering progress, making improvements, really collectively thinking about how do we take the business forward. We all want to be successful. And so in this way, you're helping them to develop self-efficacy, leadership, and true ownership of their work so that they can be accountable not only to themselves, but to each other. So empower your team. This is more than just delegating responsibilities or providing resources and support. Think through ways that you can ask for your team's insights, for their assistance, for their expertise. Challenge them to think through problem solving at a higher level. Have them put themselves, in your shoes, in the business owner's shoes, in the stakeholders' shoes, and think about each perspective so that when they're thinking through problem solving and what those different vantage points are, they have a holistic view of, again, what it is that they're doing. This ties back to vision and mission and purpose. And then also establish, one-on-one meetings, team meetings, where these discussions are happening on a regular basis. So that when you're coming to them, you're saying, we have some challenges that I'm trying to solve, and I'm curious, how would you approach it? And then you can ask them, would you be willing to take up this initiative? Who's willing to work together and help further this along? This way you as a leader can do your job, and you're not trying to shoulder all of the responsibility, and you're not trying to just, bring them up. You're lifting them up, which is a very different experience. This helps your team to grow beyond their thinking, and not only just thinking about whether it's in their purview or not. Now we're helping them, and they know that you're helping them to reach beyond, expanding in their skills, helping them to grow. And you're reminding them that you are there to help them grow for their whole career. Not just maybe even the stint that they're with you, but you're helping to lay foundations for them, set new goals for themselves, and really help them to kind of continue to move in their career. And they can see that, and that is you establishing even greater trust, greater rapport. The fourth key is communication, and really establishing consistent communication. And I want to make clear, there is a difference between consistent communication and constant communication. I think what we're experiencing right now is this feeling that, consistent communication is constant communication, and it's not the same. Consistent communication is going to be dependable, it's going to be reliable, and it has boundaries. When we don't set expectations around communication within our teams, we are running the risk of creating an environment where there's uncertainty, there's a lack of trust, there's assumptions that get made. Transparency in how you communicate, your communication style. When you communicate, what constitutes in a true emergency? Really understanding too your preference for communication. What platforms do you prefer to have specific communications on? Maybe you like everything on Slack. Maybe you like short, quick things on Slack, and you prefer, more robust communication through email. Does your team know that? Do they understand that? It's not always about trying to be so overly accommodating. It's also, establishing ways that the team can work together and eliciting their feedback and seeing what works best for them too, so that you can come upon agreements around this topic. And so many teams don't. There's just a lot of assumptions that start to happen. And it also doesn't mean that frequent communication is every time that someone has a question or a concern, or there's a status change, or just a new thought. What's happening is we're having a hard time deliberately spending our time, our energy, and our focus, because we're constantly being pinged and then feeling like we have to constantly respond. Now, this is a larger discussion in relation to the expectations of organizations, but if you're able to start establishing expectations within your team, now you're at least 80% of the way there. I remember teams when Teams first came out, there was this expectancy that everybody could respond. And I remember, receiving messages from certain individuals, and I wouldn't have time to respond thoughtfully in that moment. And it didn't constitute an emergency, and so it could wait. But because it was an emergency to that person, they felt they needed to have a decision made at that moment. And then there was no communication standard. And I remember people coming back, and they'd like, if I didn't respond right away, then they'd have like 3 question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. And so I finally was like, okay, we need to establish some guidelines around what is appropriate and when. And so it can be really helpful for teams and for leaders to create clarity around this. So schedule some check-ins, schedule office hours, and really establish what is an open door policy. When does that really work for you? Is it all the time? I have so many leaders right now. It's like, well, I want to make sure I have space for my team and I have an open door policy, but I'm not getting any work done. And sometimes it's vice versa. Well, I had that and nobody came. Well, maybe we need to establish like, what's the cadence for the team? Also, with an open door policy, I've had leaders where like, well, I just had a 2-hour discussion with a team member who was distraught. We have to think about what is going to, again, be effective, be efficient, and also empowering. We don't want our teams to feel like they're so dependent and reliant upon us that they can't make a decision. So when you're scheduling these, cadences around communication, also make sure you're drawing back in those other key elements of how you're empowering your team, how you're empowering them to make a decision. Not everything has to be run by you and checked by you. You're establishing trust. Develop set intervals for when you check emails, message channels, etc., and how you're going to respond, so that they're aware. Maybe at the top of the hour, you check your emails. Maybe, you check your messages. If it seems like an emergency, maybe you've been tagged or you've been flagged, then you can respond. And if not, maybe you have set intervals for when you kind of go back, so that you are, able to structure your time, your energy around meetings, around deep focus work, around things that require our mind to think in a certain way. And if we're continually context switching, that 15-minute email is going to take us 2 hours. We're not being more efficient. We're not being actually more productive. We can't work faster because our brain operates in a very specific way. And so we have to allow room for that. And so just because we have productivity tools doesn't necessarily mean that it's working to create greater productivity or efficiency if we're not using it in the way that our brains need it to be used. And really, truly expect the same from your team. Don't set examples or, boundaries for yourself and then expect that your team is going to operate differently. It needs to have trust. It needs to be cohesive and work together to create some agreements that will help, so that everybody has buy-in and they feel supported and there's understanding. The 5th key element is really leading by example. And so this is really crucial to understand, right? We can establish anything that we want, truly. But if we don't lead by example, that will tear down any effort that we have created. Because if you don't want your team member to do it, then you don't do it. And if you expect your team member to do it, then you need to expect it from yourself. It's a two-way street. Team members are continually watching for any inconsistencies, because anything that's inconsistent will breed distrust. And that's because we work in an environment, we work in a culture where there's a lot of do as I say, but not as I do. There's a lot of disingenuous people who say one thing and then reprimand for another. Understanding that our teams didn't start necessarily with us. They're bringing experiences and potential baggage that came from other scenarios. And so we have to be willing to work with that as well. So as leaders, you set the tone for the organization through your actions and your behaviors. So when you're establishing communication expectations for the whole team, make sure you follow them. Also empowering your team to make decisions and mistakes. Support them in their need to learn and to grow, which often requires us being able to be the safety net for potential mistakes. The more that they're learning, the more that you're giving them ways that they can grow, you're not setting them on the deep end of the pool. You're incrementally adding. So they feel like it's safe. It's safe to fail. And so think of, ways that you can do that so that you can be there to catch them. Continually asking for opinions, feedback, areas of improvement that you can make, that the team can make. Continually setting that cadence is imperative. So you can create anonymous surveys around gaps that maybe team members have within the organization, like we talked about with setting vision, mission, purpose. This can continually happen because you might have clarity around this project, but when something new comes in, maybe there isn't any clarity. Maybe there's a shift in direction. Maybe there's an organizational change that's occurred. Organizations are continually in flux. So just because you had the conversation once doesn't mean that it doesn't need to happen again. And so really setting regular intervals, quarterly intervals, however that works for your team, is going to be really imperative. And the same for psychological safety. As soon as we feel like our team is doing really well is usually the time where we probably need to check in again. And you can set up some anonymous surveys around psychological safety that just gets the pulse of your team. And it also tells them that you care. You want to make sure that they're feeling like everything's copacetic and that they can ask questions and challenge assumptions so that they're taking that ownership and it feels like a safe place to do it. There won't be retaliation. And really creating healthy boundaries for everyone so that they know it's safe. They know it's also safe to take leave. How many people do I know that, or they feel like it's not safe for them to take even a vacation or to take a little break or to step outside so that their brains can, our brains are more innovative, more creative when we're actually away from our computers, away from that executive functioning mode and able to go outside, get some sunshine, be in nature. That's when we start really percolating and having different thoughts and really allowing a space for them to ask meaningful questions that are going to help the business and move forward. So it's hopefully helpful for you to think about okay, what are some ways, what are some areas of improvement potentially within your team that you can make around establishing greater clarity of vision, purpose-driven goals, team empowerment, consistent communication, and really leading by example. So Nike's CEO, John Donahue, he said, leadership is a journey, not a destination. I think that's incredibly true. And it can be really exciting when we start to pour ourselves into it. More and more we're seeing that, people aren't wanting to step into leadership. They don't want to continue to climb that because they feel like their reward won't be great, that they're just going to have more responsibility with little reward. And to be honest, leadership isn't about necessarily how we're just continuing to climb that proverbial ladder. It's about how we create an impact. It's about providing, creating that legacy for how we show up, the work that we do and how we pour back into other people and lift up, the next generation. The culmination of all of your work, your knowledge, your expertise, that's you pouring into your team and helping to create an even better space than maybe you even had for how they can continue to rise, to show up, to be innovative, creative, and all of the reasons why joined this industry in the first place. So I really encourage you to think through, what are ways that you can empower your teams? What are some things that you could potentially make some shifts around or implement? What's something that could use a little bit extra TLC within your team and within your leadership so that you feel like you are continually refining and making an impact? So I appreciate you joining me today. I am developing a leadership program around some of these concepts. We're going to be diving deeper into really how you can cultivate and create, systemic change, teams, efficiencies, and really establishing that homeostasis and that ecosystem so that you, the organization, the team, can all feel like you're flourishing. So if you're interested in knowing more about that when it drops, DM me, write me in the comments, let me know. I'd also love to know what resonated for you. Was there a shift in perspective? What do you want to know more about? Or do you have other insights that you'd like to share? So let us know. I'd love to hear about that as well. Maybe I can think about how I include that into other conversations and the work that I do. Again, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here, and talk soon.